try and read a little bit about what evidence, what kind of trials have been, conducted, by whom, how big was the sample of the people that it was tested on? Is it a sample that one could then say, based on their findings, these are credible findings, that can then be used to say this is, something that will certainly put COVID-19 to history. So I needed to do a bit of research, analyze the info that's coming through. And so today I felt I've got reasonable, good working knowledge about this whole issue. And maybe I'm ready to share my professional views about it. Now, I'm not sure if everybody who is listening at this point is actually aware of what is this Madagascar tonic or remedy that is marketed as a cure. Now, I think a bit of background might be useful. Now, recently, at a meeting of the African Union, the president of Madagascar, Andry Rajoelina, who was part of a tele or virtual meeting of the Bureau of Assembly of the African Union, where there are heads of state, and there are also chairs of the regional economic bodies of the various parts of the continent of Africa, like the COMESA, like the SADC, like ECOWAS. So on the 29th of April, President Rajoelina, he actually made a presentation regarding a herbal tonic that they have produced. They call it CVO. Now, that telecon was actually chaired by our very own President Cyril Ramaphosa as part of the status update on how COVID pandemic is being handled by the continent. And so in that meeting, that's where there was this formal, presentation about this cure coming out of, Madagascar. Now, I'm always wary of somebody just coming up and saying, I've got a cure. During the height of the HIV and AIDS pandemic, there were a lot of people who came up and claimed that they had a cure for HIV, infection. But many of those people, when they were asked to provide the necessary proof, they were not able to do so. So when I heard about this alleged cure from Madagascar, I couldn't help but think back to the late 90s and the early 2000s about the claims that so many people made, which unfortunately were not backed up by anything credible. Now, after this presentation, the Africa CDC, which is a body within the African Union, they were quite excited by this presentation by President Rajoelina. They actually asked Madagascar to provide all relevant scientific data so that they can review all that data with a special focus on efficacy and also issues of safety, using global technical and ethical norms so that they can be able to pronounce as to whether this cure is indeed a cure or there is some benefit to it being used amongst patients with COVID-19 infection. Now, one of the things that was very clear during that presentation that's alleged to have been made by the president of Madagascar is that he was very sure that this is a cure, which is a very big claim. And so when one makes such a big claim to say something is a cure, as a scientist, a medical scientist, what one wants to know is what studies were conducted, by whom? How big was the sample? Were there any, sample biases? And also, what evidence is there about efficacy? What evidence is there around issues of safety? And so, in spite of those kind of questions that I would have had if I was part of that kind of forum, the African leaders who were part of that presentation were very excited as well. Leaders like the leader from Tanzania, who is, I would say, a COVID-19 pandemic denialist. He was very excited. He wanted to know when can he send an aeroplane to Madagascar to go and pick up some of this, cure for his people. And I'm saying denialist in the sense that he has not been fully on board about this pandemic. In his country, there hasn't been any lockdown. In his country, there is no social distancing. And in fact, he actually is blaming their national lab and saying he can't trust the information that is coming out of the national lab because the reagents that are used at the lab are actually brought from other countries. And so there could be something wrong with those reagents. And that's why people are testing positive. So out of that, that's why I'm labeling him that he's some form of a denialist. But other presidents also from Guinea-Bissau, from Congo-Brazzaville, and also from Equatorial Guinea, they have actually dispatched aeroplanes from their countries to Madagascar to go and get some of this CVO because they were convinced with what was shared in that meeting. So obviously that brings lots of questions to say, all right, these are politicians. How much understanding do they have around the rigorous processes that need to be followed, through medical science before something can be pronounced to be an effective treatment, whether it results in cure or just control of an illness. But anyway, that was the situation. They were very excited. They were just looking forward to doing trade with Madagascar. And obviously Madagascar was happy because then they have an export that they can sell to the rest of the continent. Now, today, our president, Cyril Ramaphosa, in one of his visits to one of the provinces, he actually mentioned that South Africa will be supporting Madagascar to conduct further research. They will share some of the expertise that we have in the country to make sure that more research can be done, on this alleged cure. Now, for those who don't know, under the Department of Science and Technology, we've got a number of agencies of government that are actually focusing on research on some of the indigenous plants that we have here in South Africa. A lot of behind the scenes work has been continuing, and I was hoping that I could get one of those people to be part of the meeting this evening. Unfortunately, because of issues of bureaucracy and permissions that need to be granted by people higher up, I could not secure somebody to be part of this discussion today. But that's not a train smash. As soon as they do get that authorization, I will bring them so that they can tell us not only about this particular, alleged cure. I'm saying alleged cure because obviously I'm not yet convinced. But they will tell us about other work that they are doing, in terms of extracting the active ingredients of the indigenous plants that are actually, prevalent here in South Africa. Now, okay, so the next question then I think one would ask is, okay, these guys in Madagascar, they believe that they have got a cure. Now, what study was done? Now, the information that we have, or the information I've been able to gather, is that they had a study that was conducted by the Malagasy Institute of Applied Research. It's called IMRA. Now, IMRA is actually an SOE, or a public utility, since 2012, but it's been in existence since 1957. It was founded, with a specific purpose of trying to look at how can they do research on some of the indigenous plants, that are found in Madagascar. So it's based in their capital city, Antananarivo, and to date, since 1957, they have about 50 remedies to their name. So this is not just an ordinary research agency, some type of agency that has got no credibility. They've got 50 remedies to their name. They have been able to come up with patented, type of treatments, something called made glucil, made toxin, and made casol. And those are their products from that IMRA, which is the Agency of Research on Indigenous Plants. They've got over 30 researchers and technicians that work in that. And their specific focus is on something called phytochemistry, parasitic and cellular pharmacology, experimental diabetology, pharmacodynamics, toxicology, and essential oils. So these are credible scientists that have been assembled by that country to be able to, do what they are expected to do, which is their mandate being to research their indigenous plants and be able to say, there is benefit on, using this plant or that plant. So this is the agency that conducted what we would refer to as an observational study, which was carried over a 3 weeks period. And this study was looking at whether patients who have been confirmed to have COVID-19 infection actually do benefit from the use of the COVID organics. That's the name of the product. It's called COVID organics, or CVO. Now, they had 20 patients who participated in this study. So 20 patients. The study was conducted over a 3 weeks period, and based on their findings from this a small sample of patients and a short duration of about 3 weeks, they were convinced that the concoction or the tonic or the remedy is actually a form of a cure against COVID-19. Now, it is on the basis of the findings from that 3 week study of 20 patients that they were then able to go and present this information to the body, to the African Union on the 29th of April. Now, further question then will be, what exactly is in this CVO or COVID organics, remedy or tonic? Now, the active ingredient, the actual chemical that is within that CVO or COVID organics are actually, or is the extract from what is referred to as sweet wormwood or sweet annua. Now, the chemical name of the plant is called Artemisia annua. So Artemisia annua is actually a shrub that is indigenous in Asia, especially in China and other parts of East Asia, as well as the Indian Ocean islands, which include Madagascar. Now, interest on this particular plant has been there since 1971, when the Chinese were able to extract the active ingredient of that plant, which is called artemisinin. All right, artemisinin. So since 1971, Chinese medicine has been using this active ingredient from this plant to actually administer to people with various types of illnesses. Now, so this Artemisia annua shrub, which is referred to as the sweet wormwood, is actually a relative of a similar plant that is indigenous to Southern Africa. That plant that is indigenous to Southern Africa is actually called Artemisia afra. Artemisia afra. Also, it contains the same active ingredient called artemisinin. This is a plant which is a shrub, greenish shrub, that grows a lot in the Cape, that grows a lot, throughout many parts of our country. It's normally referred to as umhlonyane, that is the Xhosa people and the Zulu people and maybe Swazi people, they call it umhlonyane. The people who are Sotho speaking, they will call it lingana. And then also South Sotho people, others, they call it zengana. So this is a plant that is indigenous to South Africa. So the plant that was used in Madagascar is a form of mhlonyane or lingana, slightly different from the one that we have here in South Africa. So, and of interest is that at this moment, the treatment for malaria worldwide, the first line treatment for malaria worldwide, makes use of what we say or what we call artemisinin-based combination therapies. So in the past, we would use drugs like chloroquine and other drugs to actually treat people who have malaria. But the first line treatment as we speak are drugs that are based on this active ingredient, from Asia, artemisinin, which is actually relatively safe, just like our lingana or mhlonyane that grows here in South Africa, which is relatively safe and is even able to be used in newborns. All right, so that is the issue. So the product that they have come up with called CVO is actually making use of this active ingredient artemisinin, which has already been used as a first-line drug to treat malaria across the world, doing better than any other drug that we were using before, because the germ that causes malaria is now resistant to those drugs that we used to use. And so when you have a credible drug like that, that is now being used for a new infection, COVID-19, you can't easily dismiss that, a kind of claim. However, I must also then say the WHO was asked to assist around this matter, and the Director General of WHO, Tedros Ghebreyesus, also an African, he was not so warm about it. What he said was that there are no shortcuts to finding effective medication to fight COVID-19. Whilst the findings from this small study may be promising, however, the study itself, it's still, it uses such a small sample and the duration was too short for, WHO to endorse this kind of treatment. So that is the attitude from the WHO. The attitude from another body, from the US, the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, they also warned against purported COVID-19, treatment. So they are basically cautioning to say people mustn't be too excited. It's still early days. And so this treatment from Madagascar should not be marketed as a cure up until proper scientific research of a large sample of people over a long duration of time has been conducted, so that the issues of efficacy of the drug are established and issues of safety are established. So that is the attitude of the scientific community, slightly different from the attitude of the politicians. The politicians, they want it and they want it now, and they want to give it to their people now. Whether this thing may pose safety concerns or not, I think what they want is just to have this thing so that they can cure their people. However, from a point of view of medical science, as much as this is promising, but the study was just too small and the duration was too short. Now, somebody would say, but why waste time and want to have a large study over a long period of time when something has been shown to be working? Well, from a scientific point of view, one could think that maybe this is more of anecdotal, evidence, where some of the findings may be what is normally referred to, there's actually a term for it. I'll come back. I'll come back to that. However, so that is the attitude of the scientific community. So, what next then for Madagascar, so that their alleged cure can actually be endorsed as actually a cure for COVID-19? Well, in line with what the DG of WHO has said, there are no shortcuts in science. There has to be proper research that is done at the lab first, and then maybe amongst animals, and then human beings, small trial, larger trials, with a clear focus on issues of efficacy and issues of safety. So to answer those friends who've been asking me, should they take this seriously? My answer would be, this is treatment that has got a lot of potential. It could well be that it is a cure. It could well be that it is a cure. However, at this stage, it's still too early to tell. What would make it to be a credible cure? Well, there would need to be a large study that is conducted across the world, looking at issues of efficacy and safety. Because when you rush to administer something that has not been studied in a large trial, you run a risk of actually putting people's lives at risk. To give you an example, since COVID-19 started in China at the end of December, a number of researchers in China and elsewhere have been trying already existing drugs, that have been licensed for other purposes. Amongst those drugs are antiretrovirals, especially the one that's called Calitra, which is a combination antiretroviral. But there's also another drug called remdesivir, which had been used for MERS, which is a relative of COVID-19, and has been used as well, for research purposes for the first SARS outbreak. So researchers in China, they decided that they must try these drugs because they're already available and see if these drugs would actually give any benefits to those patients who are suffering from COVID-19. Also, one of the antimalarials, which we no longer use, which is called chloroquine, has also been tried. And the results have been mixed, but promising from these small studies. But again, the same stance that WHO has on this Madagascar, alleged show. They felt that there needs to be large research across the world before those drugs that are being repurposed for COVID-19 could actually be accepted to be a right treatment for COVID-19. So as a result of that, WHO has authorized a study which is called a solidarity research study, where a number of countries in the world, including South Africa, are actually going to be participating, trying to administer these repurposed drugs to see if the findings are actually in line with the early results that were conducted, from the studies that were conducted in China. So I'm sharing this so that people do not think that just because this is something that is coming out of Africa, and therefore the people from the West are trying to stop progress by African countries. The same attitude to the repurposed drugs that were already licensed for other medical interventions. It's being followed. Do large-scale research, prove efficacy, prove safety. And if you can do that, and the results and the findings are actually supporting the claims, then surely agencies like the CDC, or here in South Africa, agencies like SAPRA, South African Health Products Regulatory Authority, they would be in a position to actually approve those kinds of treatment because there is proper scientific research behind them. And so, what about this treatment from Madagascar? Well, the same thing has to happen. There is no shortcut to science. There is no shortcut. It's easy to think that something is effective when you have a small sample. But actually, when you have a larger sample, you might find that the outcomes are different. And as medical people, when we took our oath, the Hippocratic Oath, one of the things we say is that we will not administer anything that may cause harm to a patient. Somebody else will argue and say, well, you guys do administer chemotherapy for people with cancer and all of those things. But even with that, we weigh the benefits to the risk. If there's more benefits to the risk, then and that risk will not cause fatalities, then the regulatory bodies may actually authorize and approve treatment to be used. This is the same kind of argument in the early days of HIV and AIDS, where earlier drugs like AZT, they were quite toxic. Some people were actually dying not from the HIV, but they were dying from the complications relating to the AZT, hepatotoxicity, that is liver damage, or nephrotoxicity, which is kidney damage, and sometimes, other type of, serious complications. And so approving any drug for use to treat patients is something that must be carefully weighed, the benefits and the risks, so that you don't cause more harm by giving that drug to patients. And so that is the story about Madagascar alleged show. I'm happy that our country is ready, as you know, to assist, because we have more capacity as a country to assist that agency, IMRA, from Madagascar. We've already gone and researched quite a number of our indigenous plants. And I'm sure when we have the people from the South African version of IMRA in the next few days or weeks, they may be able to tell us some of the research that they have done, on some of our indigenous plants. And I'm sure amongst those will be Umhlonyane, Lengana, because there has been so much research that has been done, across the world on that one plant, which is Uzvozonke. And just to mention some of the areas where that plant is being used, that is now our very own Artemisia afra, that is African wormwood, Umhlonyane or Lingana or Zengana. Now, this soft aromatic shrub, which is one of the most popular medicinal plants in Southern Africa, which is an essential part of any herbal garden. Some of us, when we were growing up, a herbal garden from our grannies would not be complete without Umhlonyane. It would not be complete without Alu ferox. It will not be complete without rooibos. It would not be complete without speckworm. These are just some of the indigenous plants that have been found to have medicinal properties going to centuries, even before Jan van Riebeeck came, to this part of the world. Lingana or Umhlonyane was already being used by the indigenous people of this continent. And so that plant, Umhlonyane or Artemisia afra here in South Africa, or African wormwood, is one of those oldest and best known medicinal plants. If you go to Kirstenbosch Gardens in Cape Town, there is a special section that deals with medicinal plants from our indigenous plants in South Africa. And amongst the plants that are there is Umhlonyane, and some of the ones that I've already mentioned to you. Now, it's been used for people with coughs. It's been used for people with fever. It's been used for people with loss of appetite. It's been used on people with colic, that is abdominal cramps. It's been used on people with headaches. It's been used for people who've got ear aches. It's been used amongst people with intestinal worms, and even in combination with something that is called the wild owls. It's been used for pain relief. And most of all, long before it was the first line drug for malaria, it was used by the people of Africa to actually deal with the symptoms of malaria. And it comes in many forms. It comes as an enema, as an infusion, as lotions, as snuff. Some of the grannies, when you have got blocked nose, they would take the leaves of this, Mhlonyane, put them in the nose, and voila, one would have their nose decongested. So it is important for us in this continent of Africa to start to appreciate some of indigenous plants that we have, because if we can appreciate that, work closely with our research institutions, and we've got quite a number of research institutions, even CSIR is actually collaborating with some of the traditional healers in looking at the efficacy and safety of some of the herbs that have been used for quite some time. So I am explaining this so that I can, one can understand that there's a lot of potential in the indigenous plants that we have here in South Africa. There's a lot of potential across the world. That's why the WHO, about a decade or so ago, they actually told their member countries to actually support indigenous health systems, because out of that, there's more remedies or treatments that can come, from research. And as Western medical, practitioners, we are starting to be faced with what we call superbugs, or germs that are no longer treatable with the antibiotics and other, antimicrobial agents that we used to use. So as a result of that, it is important that we stop looking down upon some of these indigenous plants. However, we don't take shortcuts. We make sure that rigorous scientific processes and protocols are followed to be able to prove beyond any reasonable doubt that that which we claim to be a cure or a treatment, if somebody else follows the same methodologies, they can come to the same conclusions. So my closing statement then on what I've been asked by my friends on Facebook: is this treatment from Madagascar something to be taken seriously or not? My answer is, I definitely take it seriously, because it is based on an active ingredient that is now the first line for the treatment of malaria. And by the way, both the Artemisia afra, which is our very own mhlonyane, and Artemisia annua, which is the one that they have used in Madagascar, they are also effective in the treatment of bilharzia. And this is something that our forefathers knew quite some time ago, So I cannot look down upon any indigenous plant. What I have an issue with is rushing to pronounce that something is a cure and it must be fast-tracked so that it can be given to people, when large-scale studies have not been conducted, because that would be irresponsible. So I share the same views as the DG of the WHO to say no shortcuts. If anything, let's make sure that we assist Madagascar. Let's work with WHO and see if there can be another version of a solidarity trial that can actually look at a large scale, research on this particular thing. And if it comes out being a cure, like now we are seeing with malaria, then that could be accepted as a cure. But we need to wait a little bit. We must not rush this process. We may actually mess it up, which is why I'm a bit wary when politicians are rushing to buy these products for their countries to administer to their people when the proof is not yet as solid as what one would expect, before any treatment is approved for treating COVID-19. So that is really my professional view around this matter. Somebody else may differ with me. However, as a medical scientist, I do not believe there must be any shortcuts. If we have shortcuts, we may actually be sabotaging something with a lot of potential, which was going to be one of the great exports of Madagascar, and something that South Africa may even benefit from as we are about to work with them. So on that note, it's a promising treatment, but let's wait for larger studies, and hopefully they will prove to be a credible, treatment or even a cure. And when that happens, I'll be the first one to be happy. But also we need to hear which other treatments, have been proven within our own indigenous plants in South Africa. And we will get the answer when we host the people from the agency that reports to the Department of Science and Technology. So for now, that is my long-winded answer to the question that most of my friends on Facebook have been asking me. And I hope people will appreciate that in science, there is no shortcut. Today, reading the articles, the newspaper articles, research started yesterday on a vaccine for COVID-19 in Cape Town. And so, again, it's the same rigorous process to see if there is any effectiveness of that vaccine. So we must not take any shortcuts. We must do things the proper way, because then whatever outcomes will be much more sustainable than rushing to pronounce on a cure. So I want to thank you for listening to my rambling, and I hope going forward, I will not get people trying to get answers from me. This is all I know for now. And if there's anything else that comes out based on the collaboration between, or the planned collaboration between South Africa and Madagascar, then I will be able to share more information. Oh, by the way, it's not only Madagascar that is researching this. This product from the Artemisia annua. Germany is also busy doing research on the same plant, and they are collaborating with a company from the USA and also researchers from Denmark. And so it is so important then that the researchers from Madagascar and researchers from South Africa, they move with haste to try and prove the efficacy of this thing. Because people in Europe, Germany to be much more specific, in collaboration with a company from Kentucky in the USA, and also researchers from Denmark, they are on the same trail. They want to prove that this treatment does work amongst people with COVID-19. And so with that, let's look forward, and hopefully they will be proven soon that they were right. And all we need to do for now, because there is no approved treatment, let's continue to adopt the safe washing of hands regularly with soap and water, use of sanitizers with at least 60 to 70% of alcohol, social distancing, the cough and sneezing etiquette, and generally observe the state of disaster regulations that our country has come up with. Up until then, there is no specific treatment to COVID-19. But if you do get to be a victim of COVID-19, it's not like when you come to hospital with a severe illness, we will be hamstrung. There's enough treatments, what we call supportive therapy, to deal with whatever presenting situation you have. If you have got inability to breathe because you are having respiratory distress as a complication of COVID-19, you will be put on a ventilator. And also, we may put you on steroids to try and reduce the inflammation in the lungs. And if there's a secondary pneumonia, we will put you on antibiotics. If you are one of those people who've got COVID-19 and you presented with diarrhea and you are dehydrated, we will rehydrate you, and give you something to stop the diarrhea. So basically, there are interventions that are administered, but they are not a specific cure to COVID-19. All they are supportive interventions dealing with whatever presenting issue that is there. So we all are looking forward to a specific antiviral to COVID-19, but for now, let's wait, let's be patient, let's not rush things. I'm sure something good will come from this Madagascar thing, and also the research that is being done by the collaboration between the German company, USA, and also Denmark. So on that note, I want to thank you for your time, and I hope that I've managed to shed some light on this particular issue. So I thank you for your time once again.